Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, January 25th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. The U.S. bombs Yemen for the 9th time, and the Houthis attack a U.S. ship. So U.S. Central Command said that it launched more missile strikes against the Houthis in Yemen early Wednesday morning, marking the 9th time that the U.S. bombed Yemen since January 12th. CENTCOM claimed that the strikes targeted, quote, 2 Houthi anti-ship missiles that were aimed into the southern Red Sea and were prepared to launch, end quote. They claim that U.S. forces identified that these missiles were an imminent threat. So this new U.S. bombing campaign has done nothing to deter the Houthis, as we've seen the attacks on commercial shipping continue. Later on Wednesday, the Houthis launched an attack on an American-owned commercial vessel. CENTCOM said that the Houthis, quote, fired 3 anti-ship ballistic missiles from Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen toward the U.S.-flagged, owned, and operated container ship motor vessel Maersk Detroit, which was transiting the Gulf of Aden, end quote. The command said that 1 missile landed in the water and the other 2 were intercepted by a U.S. Navy warship, so they're not saying the ship was hit. So later in the day, the Houthis said that their forces engaged in a 2-hour battle with several U.S. warships. A Houthi military spokesman Yahya Sarria claimed the confrontation resulted in a Houthi missile directly hitting an American warship, but so far I haven't seen any confirmation of that from the U.S. side. But it sounded like it was a lot of Houthi missiles and drones were being launched. So the Houthis, who are officially known as Ansar Allah, they began targeting American commercial shipping after Biden started bombing them on January 12th. And I'd just get into some basic background stuff that I've been kind of going over a lot here. And of course, the quote from President Biden admitting that the strikes on the Houthis are not working, but saying that he's going to continue them anyway. And he certainly lived up to that pledge. And now the U.S. is planning for an open-ended war against the Houthis. And this is a new U.S. war against the Houthis. The U.S. backed the Saudi UAE coalition against them in a brutal war since 2015. But there's been a ceasefire since April 2022 that's held relatively well when it comes to that conflict. All right, so the next one here. Senators question the legal authority of Biden's new war with the Houthis. So a bipartisan group of senators has sent a letter to President Biden questioning his legal authority to launch a new war against the Houthis in Yemen. And they also questioned the overall strategy of the campaign. So this letter was signed by Senators Tim Kaine, Democrat from Virginia, Chris Murphy, Democrat from Connecticut, Mike Lee from Utah, Republican, and Todd Young from Indiana, also a Republican. The letter reads, quote, the Constitution requires that the United States not engage in military action absent a favorable vote of Congress. There is no current congressional authorization for offensive U.S. military action against the Houthis, end quote. The senators noted that the Biden administration has acknowledged the strikes on Yemen would not deter the Houthis. This seems like they're referring to what President Biden said. The letter reads, quote, the administration has stated that the strikes on Houthi targets to date have not and will not deter the Houthi attacks, suggesting that we are in the midst of an ongoing regional conflict that carries the risk of escalation, end quote. The senators said that an argument could be made to justify strikes in defense of U.S. commercial shipping, but they noted that most ships that go through the Red Sea are not American. And again, before Biden started bombing the Houthis, they were not targeting American commercial shipping. The senators asked, quote, does your administration believe there is a legal rationale for a president to unilaterally direct U.S. military action to defend ships of foreign nations, end quote. The letter asked why Biden has only submitted 1 notification about bombing Yemen under the 1973 War Powers Act, as there has been multiple rounds of strikes, and they asked how the administration understands the term self-defense in the context of this new campaign. That's how somehow they're calling these self-defense strikes. And Congress has previously challenged, unfortunately, it seems like overall in the Senate and the House, the Congress is supportive of this new war. Not a surprise. But Congress has previously challenged the executive branch's authority to wage war in Yemen. Back in 2019, they passed a war powers resolution that would have ended U.S. involvement in the Saudi war against the Houthis, which included intelligence support, maintenance of their planes, all sorts of support that the Saudis really relied on for what they were doing. And that was passed by both chambers in 2019. It was a huge deal, but unfortunately it was vetoed by President Trump. So Yemen is something, when it comes to this stuff, hopefully there can be more opposition built up. I know some Republicans have been critical. Obviously, 2 Republicans signed this. But at the same time, they're so supportive of the U.S. backing Israel's slaughter in Gaza. And that's what this is all a consequence of. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. and Iraq to start talks on the future of the U.S. military presence. So the U.S. and Iraq will begin talks on the future of the U.S. military presence in Iraq, as Baghdad has been calling for the withdrawal of the U.S.-led coalition in response to U.S. airstrikes in the country. Sources told CNN that the U.S. and Iraq would use a military commission they formed last summer as a vehicle for the talks, and that part of the discussions would involve a potential timeline for a U.S. withdrawal. Sounds good, but there was also a report in Reuters about this that kind of actually said that it was not clear if these negotiations would lead to a U.S. withdrawal. That report said that the talks are expected to take several months, if not longer, with the outcome unclear and no U.S. troop withdrawal imminent. U.S. officials told CNN that the U.S. wants a withdrawal schedule based on the conditions in Iraq, including the status of ISIS and the stability of Iraq's security forces. Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani has repeatedly said, in recent weeks, that Iraq's security forces can handle the ISIS remnants that are left in the country. And now, on the other hand, so the U.S. wants to base the withdrawal on that, and then you have the Iraqi government wants to set a date for the withdrawal regardless of the situation with ISIS. The U.S., because just the situation in Iraq right now, it's so volatile, the U.S. presence risks sparking another major war in Iraq, and it's the last thing that country needs. As these attacks on U.S. bases in both Iraq and Syria continue, and the U.S. is bombing Iraq against the will of the Iraqi government. So, of course, they want them to leave. And al-Sudani, he condemned the latest strikes on Iraq, where the U.S. said that the U.S. targeted the Popular Mobilization Forces, which is a part of Iraq's security forces. It's a coalition of militias. And they called it a violation of sovereignty. A spokesman for al-Sudani said, "This unacceptable act undermines years of cooperation at a time when the region is already grappling with the danger of expanding conflict, the repercussions of the aggression on Gaza," end quote. So Iraq's national security advisor said that the way for the U.S. to reduce tensions in the region would be to pressure Israel to halt its offensive in Gaza. That would dramatically reduce tensions everywhere. But of course, Biden does not want to do that. All right, so the next one here, the Senate looks to fund Middle East war activities. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone. And the Senate is planning to add money to upcoming legislation to fund President Joe Biden's military buildup in the Middle East and the war in Yemen. Senator Susan Collins says that the legislation should be a priority as U.S. Central Command, which is the command that oversees U.S. operations in the Middle East, is quickly depleting funds. So they're saying that the cost of sending all these additional troops and warships into the region over the past few months it's cost $1.6 billion, and they estimate that the cost will be $2.2 billion over the course of a year. And this is money that they have to pay for this eventually, and they don't know how they're going to do it yet. And it seems like they're talking about, so the Senate is going to debate, I guess, and decide how to add spending for this military buildup and the new war against the Houthis. It could potentially be included in that huge $111 billion military aid spending bill that President Biden and the Democrats want to get passed. That includes aid for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. Why not roll it in there? They're also talking about putting it in the budget, but they haven't. They've just been passing like stopgap spending bills, so they haven't really agreed on a budget yet. But I'm sure, that they're going to find the money somewhere. All right, so the next one here, Israel shoots Palestinians waving a white flag. So the State Department on Wednesday refused to condemn the shooting of unarmed Palestinian men waving a white flag in the southern Gaza city of Khan Yunis, a scene that was captured on video by the UK's ITV News. So this footage is pretty horrific. They show one of their reporters interviewing this group of men who are standing on the side of the road with their hands up. And again, this is Khan Yunis. They're trying to get to their family members who are trapped somewhere. And one of them has a white flag. So they show the reporter interview these guys. And then the reporter walks away across the street and they continue to walk on. And they get shot at. And one of them is killed. I'm not sure if the others were wounded or anything. I think it might have just hit the one guy, but he died. It was fatal. So, if you watch this video, it's just like so clear that they're unarmed with a white flag, and they get shot at anyway. And so anyway, and the State Department's response to this was just unbelievable. So NBC News actually also verified the footage. They said they had 9 different videos of it from different angles, and that a Palestinian videographer who was on the scene said that the fire came from nearby Israeli tanks. So a reporter for ITV, the British network that got this footage out there, confronted the State Department spokesman Vedant Patel about the killing and asked if he would consider it a potential war crime. And Patel said that he needed more context. He said, quote, "I have seen that footage, but I am not going to comment on the specifics around that, given I'm not aware of the full circumstances on the ground." End quote. He continued saying that Israel's onslaught in Gaza is not an American operation. So he was very dismissive, just like, it's not an American operation. What are you talking about? Don't worry about it. But of course, the U.S. has funded this war in Gaza, this slaughter in Gaza, provided tens of thousands of bombs and intelligence support and political cover, all that. So, to the people being killed, it very much is an American operation. And another thing that's just really incredible, he was asked if the U.S. would support an investigation into this killing of a guy with his hands up next to somebody with a white flag. And Patel said, quote, "That is for the IDF to undertake and to determine based on the circumstances of that situation," end quote. So it's all up to the Israeli military. He was also asked about the Israeli tank shelling of a UN shelter in Khan Yunis, which occurred on Wednesday. So one of these UN facilities at this specific place, 800 people are there sheltering, and it was hit with Israeli tank fire. He claimed that the U.S. deplores the attack, but he refused to say if the U.S. would discuss it with Israel. He said, quote, "I'm not going to read out every single conversation that we have with the Israelis," end quote. So just really despicable stuff. You can't even say, shooting someone with a white flag with their hands up, that's bad. Can't even say that. And if you remember those 3 Israeli hostages that were killed by Israel, they had their shirts off and a white flag, and they shot them anyway. One briefly got away and then was shot and killed while yelling out in Hebrew. So I'm sure this is a common thing that's happening across Gaza where there's Israeli ground troops. All right, so the next one here, how Israel has destroyed Gaza's schools and universities. So this article is from Al Jazeera, and this is something I haven't really thought about too much, but it basically says schools, no children in Gaza are going to school since November 4th. They've basically been all shut down. And they have destroyed, I believe, just about every university in Gaza has been destroyed. I mean, which is just really something. And there was that video of them demolishing the university. So yeah, it says every university in Gaza is destroyed, not just schools for young kids, but the universities as well. And it's just again, just showing how they're just destroying all the civilian infrastructure. It says that they've killed 94 university professors, and up to 4,327 students have been killed, and 7,819 others have been injured as of January 16th. So just more horrific, kind of statistics about what Israel is doing in Gaza. At least 346 schools in the Gaza Strip have been destroyed or damaged. All right, so the next one here. Israel is planning permanent army stations in Gaza. So this article is from Middle East Eye, and they quote an Israeli source. So it says Israel's military has drafted plans to establish permanent outposts in Gaza, as an Israeli officer told Middle East Eye. News of the plan comes despite international pressure on Israel to accept a two-state solution with the Palestinians and withdraw its army from the coastal enclave. But this is saying that they are basically planning permanent military bases. And if you remember the other day, we're talking about them blowing up those Israeli soldiers who were killed, 21, who were killed while planting explosives in buildings in Gaza on the Israeli border. And they call this the so-called buffer zone that they're trying to establish. And what that buffer zone will be is going to be a militarized area. So that's probably what this official is talking about here. All right, so the next one here, Israeli officials deny progress in hostage talks. So several media outlets reported on Wednesday, and I believe Tuesday as well, that Israel and Hamas were making progress in Qatari and Egyptian mediated talks on a hostage deal, but Israeli officials are denying that's the case. An Israeli official told Ynet, quote, reports of an agreement in principle to a ceasefire are not correct. There are very large gaps and there is no advancement in talks, end quote. According to the Times of Israel, several other Israeli news outlets quoted Israeli officials who called the reports of a breakthrough in talks fake. The Israeli official that was speaking to Ynet accused Hamas of hardening its position. According to an Egyptian official, Hamas rejected an Israeli proposal for a 2-month ceasefire in exchange for the release of all the hostages because they want a permanent ceasefire. They want a permanent Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. Some reports indicate the two sides are considering a deal for a month-long truce and the release of some, but not all, of the Israeli hostages in exchange for the release of some Palestinian prisoners. But an Israeli official told AP there is still a long road ahead. So not really looking too good. It was kind of weird, though, because there was a lot of these reports. I woke up this morning, people sending me stuff about how they have reached some sort of agreement or broadly agreed. I saw that in a few places, and then you see this kind of all these reports rebutting that. So kind of strange. And then also on Wednesday, Qatar rebuked Netanyahu for comments that he made about the Qataris. He told family members of Israeli hostages, quote, you don't hear me thanking Qatar. It is because in many ways it is more problematic than the UN and the Red Cross, end quote. And, Israel does not like the UN. So he also said he was very angry with the U.S. for renewing the U.S. military presence at a base in Qatar for 10 years because apparently he thought they could use that as leverage to pressure Hamas. So Qatar's foreign ministry, remember, Qatar's the mediator, the real mediator of these talks. And Qatar's foreign minister the foreign ministry really hit back at him in saying that he was prioritizing his political career instead of the talks, and he was undermining their mediation efforts. Okay, so the next one here, ICJ to deliver interim ruling on Gaza genocide case on Friday. So this article is from The Guardian. South Africa's foreign minister is flying to The Hague to be present on Friday when the International Court of Justice delivers its highly anticipated verdict on South Africa's request for an interim ruling in its genocide case against Gaza. The ruling, if granted, would probably take the form of an order to Israel to announce a ceasefire in Gaza and allow more aid into the country. Well, it's not really a country. That's kind of the whole problem. So this is so when it comes to the genocide case, the ruling of whether or not Israel's committing genocide, that's not going to happen for a few years. But South Africa asked the court to issue an interim ruling to order a stop to the Israeli campaign in Gaza, to basically determine that what they're doing could be genocidal, so they should stop. The ICJ doesn't have the power to enforce anything like that, but it would be a pretty big symbolic blow to Israel and to the U.S. It would really ramp up the international pressure. Especially the calls for a ceasefire are growing in the U.S., growing even in Israel. So I think this would really heap on the pressure. So we'll see what happens on Friday. All right, so the next one here, over a third in the U.S. say that Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza. So this is another one from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute, and this is an interesting one. It says that Americans are evenly divided when asked if Israel is committing genocide against Palestinian civilians, according to a recent survey. Among young Americans, nearly half believe that Israel's military actions in the Strip amount to genocide. So according to an Economist YouGov poll conducted from January 21st to the 23rd, when asked, do you think that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians, 35% responded yes, and 36% said no. So almost, and then a third, about 29% said that they don't know. So it's kind of an interesting split here. And then when it comes to young people, 49% said yes, and Hispanic voters also said yes. And this is a demographic that Biden won back in 2020. So it shows he's losing the youth, and I think it is really going to hurt him. So I've been meaning to write a story about this, but there was just too much today. So 2 days in a row, on Tuesday and Wednesday, Biden had kind of campaign events. One of them was some sort of abortion rally, and then another one was a union, I forget the name of it, that endorsed him. And both times they were disrupted, calling him Genocide Joe and calling for a ceasefire. 2 days, that's going to happen throughout this whole campaign. I mean, the optics of that, even no matter what you think about the issue, even if you don't know much about it, you just see people yelling at every event that he does. I mean, I think, and you figure if you're Biden, that's got to wear on you. So, if you're out there and, you could go to some Democratic events and yell at Biden or yell at whoever's there, I think it's definitely worth doing, adding to the pressure. All right, so the next one here, Russia says that Ukraine downed a plane with Ukrainian POWs. So Russia said on Wednesday that Ukrainian forces shot down a Russian military transport plane over Russia's Belgorod Oblast, killing all 74 people on board, including 65 Ukrainian prisoners of war. The Russian Defense Ministry said in a statement that its forces registered 2 anti-aircraft missiles fired from Ukraine's Kharkiv Oblast, which borders Belgorod, and they say these missiles hit the aircraft, which is an IL-76 Russian military plane. The ministry claimed that the POWs were being transported as part of a planned prisoner swap with Ukraine. So Ukraine has not officially confirmed or denied responsibility for downing the plane, but sources told Ukrainska Pravda that Ukrainian forces were responsible. The Ukrainian military also hinted that it was behind the incident. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine said in a statement that it would, quote, continue to destroy the means of delivery and control the airspace to eliminate the terrorist threat, including on the Belgorod-Kharkiv front, end quote. Ukraine's military intelligence acknowledged in a statement that a prisoner swap was scheduled to take place on Wednesday, but said it had no information about who was on board the downed Russian plane. The statement said, quote, a prisoner exchange was to have taken place today, but did not. According to the Russian side, this was a result of the shooting down of a Russian IL-76 plane, which was allegedly transporting our prisoners. We currently have no reliable and comprehensive information about who was on board the aircraft and in what numbers, end quote. And it's unclear what kind of missiles were used to shoot down this plane, which was hit about 55 miles inside Russia. The head of Russia's State Duma, sorry, not the head of the State Duma, which this is one of their houses of parliament. The head of the State Duma's Defense Committee suggested that Ukrainian forces could have used the U.S.-made Patriot missiles or the German-made Iris-10 air defense system. So it seems pretty clear that Ukraine shot down this plane based on the comments. And I saw Zelensky later in the day kind of said there should be an investigation and not really denying it. So it seems pretty clear that the Ukrainians shot down this plane and killed the Ukrainian POWs who were on board. All right, so the last one here, the Ukrainian government exposed surveilling news outlets. This is one from Kyle, again at the Libertarian Institute. The Ukrainian government has conducted extensive audio and video surveillance of a major news outlet. After Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, Zelensky nationalized the media and imposed a tight control over information. So DW, the German outlet, reports that employees at Ukraine's well-known investigative outlet Behus Info have been covertly wiretapped and filmed. This doesn't look like a spontaneous act of revenge for one of our investigations. This is a case of... Sorry, I'm quoting... I messed that up there. This is the editor-in-chief of this outlet. He said it looks like it's a case of systemic long-term monitoring and prosecution with the aim of discrediting their work. After a video of employees at the outlet using narcotics surfaced, an investigation into the origins revealed the surveillance operation. President Zelensky responded to the report by calling for an inquiry regarding the wiretaps. So more just about kind of the overreach of the Zelensky government. All right, so that's it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Andy Corbley. Yemen is experiencing the true cost of Bernie Sanders' cowardice. One from Matthew Ho. Americans are paying a massive price to maintain the empire. One from Phyllis Bennis. The only solution to the violence in Yemen and the Red Sea is a ceasefire in Gaza. One from Blaze Malley. Why is ceasefire considered a dirty word? One from William D. Hartung. Washington is exaggerating China's military budget. And that is everything. Lots of stuff on the lower portion of the page about just horrific things happening in Gaza. There's so much. This idea that they have that the intensive phase of Israel's war in Gaza is over is just nonsense. They've just been obliterating southern Gaza. Anyway, that is it for me for today. You can always support this show by liking, subscribing wherever you watch, or if you listen to the audio version, you can leave a rating or a review. Tell your friends, share, comment, spread the word about antiwar.com and what we're doing over here. But that's it for me for today. One more show tomorrow, so I will be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.